Hi guys. Come on in. Hey everybody, it's Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is our very first Recording Studio Q&A Periscope. Here with Ryan and Hunter, and looks like maybe somebody's following. I can't see there. How you doing?
Yeah, one follower.
Say hello if you want. But we're just here having coffee and chatting about stuff from the studio. So if you got any questions, feel free to chime on in. Okay. So what were we talking about yesterday, guys? What was the some of the questions you were asking?
I was asking how I can make sure that I'm figuring out how to interpret some artist's vision properly when I'm either mixing or doing a tracking session with them, figuring out proper like setups or EQs or something like that to make sure I'm getting their sound the way that they want it.
All right, so trying to figure out how to interpret an artist's vision. I mean, that's a kind of a general question, you know. It's like I think the answer is probably communication, you know, getting to talk with an artist and just figuring out what it is that they have in mind and probably breaking it down to them. And it's like, are you talking about like an overall vision for a record? Or are you talking about a vision for a specific overdub, like a guitar sound or a drum sound, something like that?
I'd say more of a record. Just trying to make sure everything matches and fits together to make it sound like it's one piece instead
Cohesive.
of it's cohesive.
All right, so a record, then you need to have a common language with the artist. So I'll get some water in this coffee maker. You know, you gotta like have a common language with the artist so that if you're talking about a rock record, you're talking about the same kind of record.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a folk record, you're talking about the same kind of thing.
Okay.
And sometimes an easy way to get a common language going is to start referring certain records. I'm the only one in this video. I wish you guys were in it so that like you could tell that
Like,
we're hanging out.
Get over here.
Well, we need a closet, the Periscope closet. I don't know if I believe that there's really somebody watching this or not. I can't tell. It says one more viewer. So yeah, I guess there is.
Who's watching?
I don't know. Hello. You're our first viewer, whoever you are. So welcome. So like if you're making a folk record or something, you know, and you reference your favorite folk record, and you could ask the artist, you'd be like, can you tell me a little bit about the sound? It's like, you talk about the instrumentation so that you get a feel for what kind of, if it's electric, heavy distorted guitars, that's a totally different thing than an acoustic guitar that just sounds really natural, you know?
Okay.
And so like sometimes getting them to play you and reference their favorite records will let you listen to it and get a feel for what you think that sound is and what that means to you. And then you could talk about that record with the artist and like talk about what the drums sound like and what the instruments sound like or what the feel of the album is like, how loud the vocals are, things like that.
Okay.
Making some coffee. And then if you're talking about individual overdubs or something, sometimes you can pull up a reference to listen to something. The problem with references like that, though, is it can also be confusing. It can feel like a spiraling rabbit hole to talk about different sounds when, like, ultimately, like, no, you may not have any idea how to really get that exact sound.
Yeah.
But you can do some Googling. Sometimes you can find a sound that sounds cool and then Google it and find out what kind of guitar or amp they use, and that can be cool too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I would probably not do when you're in the studio and it's time to press record.
Yeah.
Do that beforehand.
Yeah. Pre-production.
Yeah.
But if you're about to do a particular overdub, then yeah, you can pull up. Spotify is a great tool for that because you can find just about any record there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and start out. Do you guys want some coffee, anybody?
Sure.
Help yourself. Just grab a mug, stick it in there, press small or big, and you're good to go.
All right.
So,
Make more sense?
yeah, using Spotify and being able to find any album you want and then just flip through different sounds, get inspired. That's a good thing. I mean, I think it's really helpful to listen to records in the studio because sometimes it just sets a vision in your ear before you go for what you think something sounds like, and if you can hold on to that a little bit, then when you're making sounds, you can try and create something that's like that you can push a sound to that place. You know, a lot of times though, you may not be able to get anything like that. So it can feel like you're chasing your tail if you're trying to really get the same thing.
Okay.
And I've done records too where we had I had a band reference a Nine Inch Nails track for the song, and they played me the intro that had this cool sound, and just like on a whim I was like, let's just copy that and throw it in the song, you know, just like, let's just fucking put it in there and see what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And we copied it, threw it in the song, and played it, and it completely didn't sound the same at all anymore.
Really?
Like it completely lost its thing just by being in the music we were working on.
Okay.
So with that in mind, you know, Pink here, fan of Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, you know, if you had the exact same sound in your record, it probably wouldn't even sound like Dark Side of the Moon anymore, you know.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think using references of records is a great way to start having a common language with the band.
Okay.
And then once you get recording and once you get going and you're making the record, you're making tracks in the studio, and you've got some sounds that you've already pulled up, then you start to have a common language that is actually the record that you're working on. And now you're talking about that snare drum that you used, or that drum sound, or back on that song, remember that beat you were playing, or remember that first guitar we did on the first track, let's go back and get that sound again.
That makes sense.
But wait, it keeps going. You think it'd be over. But so it's one of the reasons why recall photos is so important in the studio and why we do those, because when you're working with a producer who talks about they love that guitar sound you got for him 3 songs ago, and you want to pull that back up again for this song, then all of a sudden it's like, that's your common language, and your recall photos are your spell check.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a good analogy.
I'll just bring it up one more time. Saying the recall photos are so much better than little documentation, pictures, and drawings that you're doing all the time. It just takes way too long
Yeah.
sitting there if you're gonna get something done real quick. Just like pulling it up, or just like trying to see if you can write it down real quick if you're just trying to get out of there or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're viewing this for real, can you let us know if you can actually hear what we're saying, just so I know if the microphone's working and all that? Because the whole point would be for somebody who's watching this to be able to join in the discussion if they want to. So feel free to say something if you want. If you really exist, maybe you're a
Anything.
robot.
If you're reading.
That'd be awesome.
Or a heart, at least a heart.
I mean, seriously, I bet robots one day they'll want to know how to record
yeah.
music too.
Probably
They
so.
probably will,
You know?
After watching Ex Machina, nothing's off the table in my
So I've been listening to this podcast on my drive called Singularity One-on-One.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about the coming, you know, the
That's on
concept of the
competition.
coming of the singularity, which is the ultimate artificial intelligence of the whole internet, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating. They bring in all these guests and they talk about all kinds of stuff like that.
That's crazy
Especially,
stuff.
I haven't seen Her yet. I need to go see that.
Oh, with Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah.
I haven't seen
Right,
it either.
yeah. And is it his girlfriend or something? Or she's a
Mhm.
robot?
Yeah, it's like AI or something on his phone.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, on his phone.
Yeah.
But she's not even physical.
I don't think she is.
Like
Just
Cortana.
yeah,
Just
it's sort of like Siri or Cortana from the
Yeah.
Microsoft Windows 10 stuff now. Or,
With affection.
yeah.
It's weird.
Can you have a tranny AI?
Maybe.
No idea.
They should offer all kinds.
Is that possible?
Well, I mean, you can
Hold on,
change
hold on,
the.
guys, come in closer. Come in closer. There you go. We have to drink coffee like this.
Hold up, gotta grab one.
That's
Oh, yeah,
really
get you
bizarre.
coffee,
Gotta
man.
give us one.
That's really funny.
Just-
Yeah. Cheers. So let's see. Thoughts about records. So today we're doing some soldering in the studio. Soldering is best done when you have eyesight to see what you're soldering. So now I've got to use a bright light and, you know, magnifying glass if I got one. That helps a lot. But soldering's fun. It's like the soldering and repairing cables and building stuff in the studio is one of the
It is fun.
only
Yeah.
aspects of it that kind of feels like it's a craft. You know?
Yeah.
Like it's actually you're actually working with your hands and
Mhm.
making stuff, which is pretty awesome. Otherwise, you're just clicking buttons in the computer these days.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the old way of recording is so fascinating to me, with tape and the razor blades and everything. I've never even.
Oh, I know.
That's
I
something
can't
that-
imagine having
Oh,
to do
man.
that. Like,
I want to have the stress of splicing tape, but I really don't want to
you
have
don't?
the stress of splicing tape.
It's just like anything else. I mean, once you get good at splicing, it becomes kind of second nature. I got really, really, really heavily into splicing tape on one particular record, and these guys wanted to use tape on everything. I was still headed to Pro Tools, but we had multiple reels of tape, and they wanted to record all the drums onto tape and then splice it out like we were comping drums in Pro Tools out of 5 takes, but splice it together out of 5 takes on tape.
oh
God.
And so I devised a system where we were recording it to Pro Tools and recording it to tape simultaneously. We had striped SMPTE on the tape machine, and Pro Tools was in sync with SMPTE as well. So what I did is I went into the takes on Pro Tools and I comped the entire drum performance together exactly the way we wanted it. I don't know if I moved copies around. I might have even done a little bit of that. And then I went into the Pro Tools comp and I found the SMPTE timestamps for every single region that I did, and I wrote them down. I had this sheet of paper that had SMPTE location markers on it, and then what the take numbers were, and then I transferred over to the tape reels, and I scrolled through each reel of tape, and I had marked which reel each of those takes was on, and everything, and I recreated the entire drum comp off of tape by scrolling through to different SMPTE numbers to find all my edit points. And so by the time I was done, there were like 35 edits on one song for a piece of drum take. It was the most insane thing ever. And it was not even, like we didn't even end up using it really.
Oh,
But
really?
it was, like,
God.
it was so intense. So it was just like non-stop pieces of tapes and edit across the whole thing. But it was pretty intense, and it worked. By the time it was done, it sounded all right. What else did we do? The band wanted to know, and I have to include myself too because I didn't have the answer. But we're trying to determine, well, what kind of tape should we record on? And so we had different tape formats, and then we had different elevation alignment formats and tape speeds. And so what we did was we would take one reel of tape like 499 and we put it on the machine, and then in order to do a shootout, this was back when people were just like, money was just there to be spent. So to do a shootout, we aligned each track to a different alignment, and then we would just change the tape speed or record to different tracks with different alignments on there, and then play them back and compare them later. And finally, after doing that and comparing the way that, I don't remember what we did, drums or some mono thing, or we just sent a record to it or something, we ended up taking Ampex 456 at 15 ips was like the sound for those guys. It just sounded the most like old Rolling Stones, or just like old rock and roll.
That's
crunchy mid-range and everything. Sounded awesome. Now I'm doing a lot of stuff with Bassif 900 at 30 ips. I really like that for my 2-inch 16 track here. Sounds killer.
Cool.
That's my fave right now.
Tape
Sweet.
sounds so great.
Yeah, tape sounds really, really awesome. And the record that I'm finishing, or just finished, the record release party is in a few weeks, I think. You guys should come to it.
Oh yeah.
All right.
The band is called the Twigs. Not
Okay.
Twigs, just Twigs.
Okay.
Twigs, check them out. TWIGGS. These guys are awesome. East Nashville band, and it's a guy and a girl, Joe and Abby, and she does most of the singing, plays bass, but they sing together. They actually trade off. It's pretty even, and they'll
There's
do
a call and response
harmonies.
thing going on.
Yeah, he
there.
plays guitar, drums, and another guitar player, and it's just like killer. It's just rock and roll. Great
Yeah,
cool.
indie rock. And the songs are like all 8 minutes long.
Oh,
Nice.
All right,
yes.
I like long ones.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm super excited about that record. I'll have to make sure you guys check it out and
All right.
get you a copy of it. And that's going to be done. The release party is in a couple of weeks
Sweet.
at Cinema. If you're in Nashville and you're listening to this, go check out Twigs release party at Cinema. Maybe it's private invite only. Oops, sorry.
Would this be a good time to bring up side chain compression?
Sure.
All right.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So how do you bring it up?
Okay, well, I guess my question is, what's the significance from that sidechain EQ and compression and just putting it on the track directly?
Okay, sidechain, EQ, and compression, and putting it, and not sidechaining it, you mean?
Right.
Okay, so sidechain just means that if let's say you have a, let's see, what might I use it for? Let's say you have a bass guitar, and you put a compressor on the bass guitar track.
Okay.
Every time the bass plays a note, the compressor, the threshold, the level might, when it crosses the threshold that you've set for the compressor, then the compressor is going to compress the bass a little bit and squish it back or pull the volume back. So in other words, the thing that controls whether or not the compressor compresses the bass is the bass dynamic, the volume of the bass notes. So if you use the sidechain, you could send something totally different to control that compressor. So you could send the kick drum over to it so that the bass always stays loud, but every time the kick drum hits, it pushes the bass out of the way for a sec.
Okay.
And makes a little room for the kick drum to sneak through.
Okay.
So if you're listening to EDM music, electronic dance music, translation, you know that whole
like an 808 kick or something like
that stuff, that whole bouncing sound, that's all sidechain compression.
Okay. Okay.
Or it's somebody faking that sound by actually drawing in automation lines on different instruments. So listen to that stuff next time you check out a track and see if you hear like certain instruments pumping and breathing. That's probably like somebody set up a sidechain compressor so that whenever the kick hits, it like causes the instruments to get out of the way.
Okay.
Otherwise, what happens is to make the kick loud enough, you end up having to turn it up so loud that it's like way over the top sounding. So that's a way to have a kick up as loud as you want to go, you know, your 4 on the floor beat, and then all the other instruments like rushing in to fill in the space in between.
Okay, I see.
Or whatever instruments you want. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that because I don't mix EDM all the time. So.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool.
How often do you have those kind of clients?
Never.
Never, okay.
I mean, a little bit, you know, like Bonnaroo, we've got
Right.
clients that come in
true.
that are, Sylvanesso was a band that was in at Bonnaroo this year, and it's a lot of electronic tracks, and she's singing on top of it.
Okay.
And that was super cool. But again, I'm not really doing any kind of tricky mixing with that stuff. It's more just level balances and stuff. And then I've done hip hop production in the past where I've messed around with that. And I did a record just this fall where we were trying to do that. But I feel like that stuff, to do it right, you really have to know what you're doing. And you really have to it has to be intentional from the production and for you to mix it that way and have it sound right.
Okay.
So like I think the last track I did like that, I don't think the production really intended for it to do that. So it didn't add up quite the way I was hoping it would. You know. But that's kind of what sidechain compression is about. You can also use sidechain compression where you take it's still being triggered by the sound that's on that track that's in the compressor, but you can take that sound, go out and filter it through some EQ and then sidechain it. So that's sort of like de-essing, you know, it's a little bit like that. Like you're taking just the, you know, the S's and the high frequencies and the sibilants, and then that stuff's being sidechained in to compress the track. So whenever that stuff happens, the track compresses.
Okay.
All right.
That's good. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
It's going to be useful.
So going back to breathing, when you're talking about how with like saying the bass and the kick going back and forth, I'm listening to a lot of like doom and gloom kind of stuff going on with the like art and the metal. I hear a lot of like the breathing going on in cymbals, like riding crash cymbals and whatnot. What would be causing that? Would that also be like the compression that's going on in that?
It might be. Yeah, I'd probably have to hear the example that you're thinking of. But if you're hearing the cymbals go away and come back out, that's probably the compression.
It's like a loud hit, and then it like kind of just like dips out and comes right back in, and then there's another hit after that, and then it dips out, comes back in.
Yeah, it's probably sidechain compression, or it's possible that the overhead cymbals themselves are just going through a compressor, and that, you know, the snare is going to be a bigger transient in the overheads than the cymbals are.
Yeah.
So they would cause the overheads to compress a little bit. But you could send the kick and the snare to the side chain of that overhead compressor and really control how much they compress that way.
All right.
And sometimes I've done mixes where I'll set up the kick and the snare, and I'll just create a bus where I call it like kick control and snare control, and I just am always sending out from the kick track and the snare track. It's always going out on a bus at 0, on a send fader that's set at 0 and pre-fader, so that's just always feeding that bus. Then that way, on any compressor anywhere else in the track, if you want that thing to be guided by the kick or the snare, or you want to see what it sounds like if you let the kick or the snare control that sound, you can just simply put a compressor on it or a limiter, and then put a side chain, and then just have it fed by the kick or the snare bus. You can't have it fed by both, though. That's the only bummer. Unless you set up like an alternate summing bus that is both of them. So you could, I mean, you can do whatever you want to, however complicated you want to get with it. But it's fun to play with that stuff. So it's the best way to experiment is to set something up and then just go super extreme with it, so you can really hear what it's doing. And they'll be like, "Holy shit, that sounds awesome!" And I don't know if you guys would ever know the band Portishead.
Yeah, I like
remember Portishead, right?
Yeah.
So I remember one of the first things that I noticed about compression and sidechain compression, whether it was sidechain or not, but Portishead would have like, it was like this slow, what do they call it, trip hop or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Like
So that was the sound of like the kick squashing the compression down, and then the loop like opens up, and then the kick grabs it and squashes it down. So that's a super cool sound.
Yeah.
To use.
Yeah. Makes sense how they do that now.
What about you? You got other questions about stuff, life in general? What the hell are you doing? Why we're standing in a closet drinking coffee?
I kind of want to know more about like how like the difference between just mixing or like getting a mix ready for mastering and like what mastering does exactly, like what happens in the mastering process, or how you would like what the best way to like get your mix prepared for mastering.
For mastering?
So you don't like go too far and like try to step on what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that I hear people saying as far as how to be best prepared for mastering is to mastering. People will typically tell you, don't mix it too hot, don't use a limiter, because what happens is if you make the volume so loud, then they have no more room to work. They can't boost any EQ, and all they can do is cut. So sometimes the mastering engineer, the very first thing they'll have to do is pull the level down 3 dB, 4 dB, and then start mastering from there, just to even try and sculpt the sound. So with that in mind, you might consider, if you're mixing with a limiter on your track as the last thing, just to prevent overs, then you might take the limiter off and print a version like that and send it to mastering. However, I also know mix engineers that have said, yes, I slam the hell out of it because I don't want the mastering engineer to fuck it up. So, very intentionally, I know a mix engineer who gets it to sound exactly the way he wants it to sound, and he's like, I'm not letting you mess up my mix. I want you to undo all my hard work. So, but that takes a great deal of confidence, and this particular guy is one of the better, best mixers I've ever heard, and he knows exactly what he's doing. I definitely subscribe to the idea that I like to work trying to create a sound and go for it. Just like committing to sounds, I think it's better to just commit to a sound when you're in the studio. However, I also am perfectly happy to then take the limiter off at the end and leave some more breathing room for the mastering engineer. I also think that one best way to do it is, if you know who's going to be mastering it, ask them. Get a feel from them, because they're the ones who are going to know what it's like to deal with it. And so they'll know what their biggest frustrations are, and they'll tell you, give you guidance. About leave a lot of breathing room there or whatever. But I think you definitely, if you're going to mix through a compressor, I think you want to have the compressor on while you mix. I actually know another mixing engineer who says that he actually mixes it with it in bypass for quite a ways before he turns it on, because he felt like he was working harder towards getting the mix right without relying on the stereo compression, and then drops it in at the last minute. And because if you do have your stereo compression on while you're mixing, it's very easy to push too far into it, and then find your subtle moves aren't making as much of a difference, So I think you have to experiment with that. But ultimately, in the end, I don't think you want to take the mix compression off for the mastering engineer. unless you really screwed it up. But that's something that's part of you sculpting the mix. So I think you want to leave that sound on there because that equals the sound you were trying to get. You know.
Right. Yeah, like the main thing that we'd heard about the mastering stuff, the main thing they talked about was that breathing room. They'd mix it like -10 to -60 dB. They put it in between there, so they got enough room to bring all these levels up.
Yeah, that said, I'm sure the record I just did was probably slammed. And it was also like my favorite record that I've done in a long time. So,
all right.
you know, it's got distortion built into it, but that's like part of the vibe.
Right. So they'll work around it. They got it.
Yeah. Well, groovy. Shall we call it? That's pretty good for coffee time number 1, Periscoping.
All right.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching, whoever you are.
One viewer.
I'm going to press the save to camera roll or save to Periscope or whatever it does. Save it to Twitter so that, hold on, I'm cutting your head off there, so that maybe this can be watched later. And if you have a question about anything you heard on there, feel free to tweet right there. Or you can go check out anything you want to learn more about recording at recordingstudiorockstars.com. That's rockstars plural. And look for the podcast, look for the YouTube channel, and look for the blog. And if you got any questions, you can send them directly to me at lij@recordingstudiorockstars.com. That's LIJ @recordingstudiorockstars.com. Peace out. See ya.